Aloha mai kako. Good morning, everyone. This is the June 5th, 2024 Land Use Commission meeting. This is a hybrid meeting which is physically located at the Leo Papa'a Kamehameha State Office Tower, 235 South Baratania Street, Suite 406 in Honolulu, 96813. This meeting is open to the public, and it's also being attended by a few participants by Zoom, including myself. Court reporting transcripts are being done from this Zoom recording of this meeting. For all meeting participants, I'd like to stress the importance of speaking slowly, clearly, and directly into your microphones. Before speaking, please state your name and identify yourself. As I said, this is a hybrid meeting, and please be aware that all meeting participants are being recorded on the digital record of this Zoom meeting, which will be posted to YouTube, and it will also be used for court reporting purposes. Your continued participation is your implied consent to be part of the public record of this event. If you do not wish to be part of the public record, you should exit the meeting now. My name is Dan Giovanni, and I have the pleasure to serve as the LUC chair. We currently have 8 seated commissioners. Along with me are Commissioners Leo Higashi, Commissioner Melka Hele, Commissioner George Atta, Commissioner Brian Lee, Commissioner Nancy Carr-Smith, and Commissioner Mike Imane. Commissioner Kuiki Kamakea Ohelo is excused from today's meeting. Also in attendance are the LUC Chief Planner, Scott Derrickson, LUC Staff Planner, Martina Segura, LUC Chief Clerk, Ariana Kwan, LUC Attorney General, Melissa Goldman. The LUC Executive Officer, Daniel Orendanker, is traveling with today, is out of the country, and is unavailable for today's meeting. The first order of business is the adoption of minutes from our meeting of May 8th, 2024. Ms. Kwan, has there been any written testimony submitted on the May 8th, 2024 minutes?
No, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Kwan, are there any members of the public in attendance who have signed up to testify on the adoption of the minutes today?
No, Mr. Chair.
Commissioners, are there any corrections or comments on the minutes? If not, is there a motion to adopt the minutes of the May 8th, 2024 meeting?
Chair, I just want to abstain from voting on the minutes. I wasn't present at the meeting. Thank you.
Was that Commissioner Kahele?
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioner Kahele.
This is Leo Higashi. I move to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Commissioner Higashi. Do I have a second to approve a set on the minutes motion?
Yeah, I second my motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Atta. So all in favor of adoption of the minutes with the, please signify by saying aye. And since it's Zoom, why don't you wave your hand as well?
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? Hearing none, the minutes are adopted, and please note that Commissioner Kahele abstained from voting. Next order of business is our tentative meeting schedule, and I'll call on Mr. Derrickson to please proceed with a presentation on the schedule for future meetings of the commission.
Okay, aloha kako. On Wednesday, June 19th, we're going to be on Maui for SP 97-390 Central Maui Landfill Status Report. On Thursday, June 20, we'll still be on Maui for A11-792 County of Maui Department of Housing and Human Concerns Status Report. On July 10th, please save the date, July 10th, Wednesday, on Oahu, we're going to have a state ethics training for just the commissioners and the staff. On July 23, 24 on Oahu, we'll have the LUC commissioner training by staff. August, this is another one to take note of. We have meetings scheduled on a Tuesday and a Wednesday, which is unusual for us. So August 7th, Tuesday, and Wednesday, August 8th, on Oahu for the Waimanalo Gulch landfill special permit SP 09-403. Then continuing August 21, also on Oahu, where we hope to have the adoption of the order for the Waimanalo Gulch special permit. Followed by Thursday, August 22nd, we'll start hearings on the special permit SP 73-147, Makakilo Quarry. Then August 29th, which is a Thursday, we're going to continue the Makakilo Quarry hearing on Oahu. And tentatively, if we need, we are scheduled for Friday, August 30, also on Oahu to finish up Makakilo Quarry. Those are just the hearings for the quarry special permit. In September, Wednesday, September 4, we hope to hold the hearing for adopting the order for the Makakilo Quarry special permit. And then Thursday, September 5, right now is open. September 11 through 13 is a Hawaii Congress of Planning Officials conference on the island of Hawaii. So that's a Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Right now in September, at the end of the month on the 25th and 26th, we have tentative schedule blocked out, but nothing on the schedule at the moment. We do have several special permits that are in process on several different counties, and we may need those dates. So just keep them open, please. If you have any questions, let me or the staff know.
Thank you, Mr. Derrickson. Commissioners, any questions on the tentative schedule?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, who is this, Mr. Yamane?
Yeah, Scott, you mentioned Tuesday, Wednesday on August 7 and 8, but that's a Wednesday, Thursday. So is it on Wednesday, Thursday, not Tuesday, Wednesday on August 7th and 8th?
I stand corrected.
Okay, so it's Wednesday, Thursday then.
It's Wednesday, August 7th and Thursday, August 8th.
Thank you. No more questions, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for the correction, Mr. Derrickson. Any further questions or comments on the tentative schedule? Looks like it's going to get pretty busy, so everybody please mark your calendars. Okay, our fourth order of business is the presentation of the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development Soil Study. This agenda item is an informal briefing from the State of Hawaii Office of Planning and Sustainable Development on soil classification systems and use in regulating agricultural lands. Study is conducted pursuant to Act 189, Sessions Law of Hawaii 2022. I will now recognize whether there's any written public testimony submitted on this matter. Ms. Kwan, has there been any written public testimony?
No, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Now I'm calling members of the public provide public testimony on this. Has there been any, Ms. Kwan?
No, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I would like to note that the Commission will be asking the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development questions. Only the Commissioners will be allowed to question OPSD during the presentation. Once the presentation and the Commissioners' questions are completed, members of the public will be given a second opportunity to provide testimony or questions on the presentation. So, Ms. Kwan, you're confirming at this time for the first round of public testimony, nobody signed up. Is that true?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to proceed with OPSD's presentation, and I just have a quick question for Attorney General Goldman. Is there any necessity for me to swear in any of the participants that will be making a presentation from OPSD?
No, Chair. No reason to swear them in.
Thank you very much for that clarification. So we'll proceed. I'll turn it over to OPSD.
Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners. This is Katia Balaciano, Land Use Administrator from the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development. I have with me here today Aaron Setagawa, Planner of OPSD, who's been a project lead on this. He'll briefly introduce the project and then turn it over to the consultants who've been assisting us with this matter.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Good morning, Chair Giovanni, members of the commission. As State Katia said, my name is Aaron Setogal with the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development. I'm going to give a brief introduction to the project before turning it over to our consultant to do the presentation. As Chair Giovanni said, mentioned, the 2022 legislature passed Act 178 that directed OPSD to conduct a study on the suitability of the Land Study Bureau's soil rating system and other soil classification systems in regulating the use of agricultural lands. The study was to be conducted with the assistance of the Department of Agriculture, University of Hawaii College of Tropical Agricultural and Human Resources, and the Land Use Commission. And representatives of these organizations are represented on our study steering committee. OPSD issued an RFP. Supersistence LLC was selected to conduct the study. And the briefing today, let me introduce to you the people who will be doing it. On my left is Hunter Hevelin of Supersistence LLC. Assisting him in the corner is Barbara Natal from Group 70. And attending remotely is Ryan Ringet from Group 70, as well as Dr. Azan Mak. And now, without any further ado, turn it over to Hunter.
Thank you, Aaron. And all right, cutting loose over here. Chair, Vice Chair, Commissioners, thank you for being with us today. As Aaron said, my name is Hunter Hevelin. I'm an agriculture and food systems planner. My firm is called Supersistence, and have assembled a crack team to take on this effort over the past almost year now. So we're going to give a bit of a project update of what we've done thus far. I know some of you have been able to participate in some of our previous rounds of outreach, but wanted to give kind of a little bit more of a background, both on the project as well as some of the findings, the research to date, and then we're going to get into some of the draft recommendations that have been so far developed, and that our next round of outreach will be digging into a little more to further hone. So as a quick update on kind of the status of the project, we produced an interim report for the legislature for their 2024 session that really looked at, dove deep into evaluating our existing soil or land evaluation classification systems. We did a fair amount of stakeholder outreach and compiled a volume of information that we heard during these outreach meetings into this report, as well as did some review of applicable kind of state and county codes and regulations where these classification systems come up. Go to the next. So we started in July of last year, had a preliminary research phase, a preliminary outreach phase, again, produced an initial report. From that volume of information, we've drafted some initial recommendations and are now in the commencement of our kind of second round of outreach, really focused on honing in on the final recommendations. So what are these systems that we're talking about? The primary one that, oh, you go to the next one, Barb. So the primary system is LSB, or Land Study Bureau, right? So developed tasked in the late 1950s, developed mostly over the course of the 1960s, is the primary system applied for agricultural land classification across the state. This was developed with soils data that was collected in the 1930s, that was then released in the 1950s, which currently governs land use now nearly into the 2030s. And so the system is the one most utilized, and we'll show some data on that in a few slides in our regulatory systems, but there are others. So ALISH, or Agricultural Lands of Importance to the State of Hawaii. Distinct from the Land Study Bureau, which provides a classification of A through E as a gradation of say declining quality as you go down the alphabet, the ALISH system classified lands into three categories, focused on prime, unique, or other important agricultural lands. While the Land Study Bureau effort to some degree emerged out of rapid urbanization and concern about the loss of agricultural land in the islands, the ALISH process to some degree was influenced by national movement to understand and attempt to preserve quality agricultural lands across the country. A later system, again, kind of following on from some national interest, was the LISA, or Land Evaluation and Site Assessment. This was initially developed in the late 80s in, I believe it was New York, and sort of caught on. The benefit of the LISA system, as distinct from those prior, was that it considered factors beyond just physical soil characteristics in trying to understand agricultural land utility or land quality. The system that was developed for Hawaii took into account a number of different factors. However, it was never formally adopted after the analysis was completed. And unsurprisingly, it shows up nowhere in our formal regulatory processes, though it is embedded in a couple of administrative rules. The last system is less a system of classification, but a system of a database managed by the USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service, or NRCS, which is the Soil Survey Geographic Database. And this is the largest compendium of physical soil characteristics, along with some interpretations. While the SURGO database itself is not, as I said, a classification system, the NRCS, through SURGO, does release a classification system called the Land Capability Classification, or LCC, which is applied in many states across the country for agricultural regulatory governance in the same way that LSB is applied here. SURGO is in some ways, or NRCS classifications are referenced in a few places in our regulations as well. So we did a deep dive into all of those. I'm sure in preparation for this meeting, you all went and read the entirety of the interim report and committed to memory our entire project website. But in case you didn't, or the coffee hasn't kicked in yet, we'll provide a little bit of a summary. So we took these systems and then tried to do an assessment of how they might compare against one another across a few different factors. And these factors weren't just pulled out of a hat. They were in part, some were, I believe, even in the RFP. Others were developed as part of our contract process, and others were developed in concert with our project team, the steering committee, and OPSD. And so we then, attempted, and this is, turning into graphic form what was a much longer written piece to try and just convey the information rapidly. But you'll see that in terms of accuracy, we found many of the systems to have some degree of fidelity in being able to speak to whether or not a soil has inherent physical characteristics that would classify it as, we could say, quality lands. But we are also interested in whether the system was adaptable to changing crops and conditions, whether the process and documentation were transparent, whether it considered factors beyond just physical soil characteristics, the extent of its geographic coverage, whether productivity and other agricultural values were integrated, and then some of the ones that came in from our, I believe it was in part the steering committee, whether irrigation infrastructure was considered, and whether cultural and indigenous considerations or facets were integrated into the classification system. As you can see by the mostly red at the bottom, wasn't particularly of import during the development of these systems. So while each of them have some of their limitations. Some are more robust than others, but overall, kind of the development of next generation systems, we're trying to figure out how to maximize the strengths and minimize the weaknesses that we saw in some of those. Excuse me. We also went through all of the state and county codes and regulations and administrative rules. I say all with a bit of an asterisk. Not all of them have been digitized. Not all of them are readily accessible, and many of them weren't necessarily applicable. So we tried to constrain a little bit, particularly when looking for administrative rules in certain departments. We found about 40 different references to soil or land classification systems in our regulatory structure, of which the vast majority were at the state level. And this is both in administrative rules as well as in the Hawaii revised statutes. Hawaii County had half as many as the state, but more than every other county, in part because they had applied it in a lot of their planning processes. And if you go to the next one. And so the top bar here really is just a reorganization of the previous distribution. But in terms of the actual which systems are most regularly referenced, the Land Study Bureau, having been around the longest and developed in part for some of these purposes, is the one that shows up most. You will notice, however, that unspecific references to soil quality is actually the highest frequency, right? So we have a lot of regulations that say soil quality should be considered or soil classification should be considered, but does not actually determine or delineate which system should be applied. And at the bottom there's also a number of references that just say that soil type, which is more of a pedological kind of soil taxonomy, needs to be included in reporting. So it's less of a regulatory structure. It's more about just documentation of a land type. And as I mentioned prior, the LISA system, of course, only has a couple of references, and those are only in administrative rules. When we consider the focus of these, the vast majority rather the largest number are focused on district and zoning definitions. So district at the state level and zoning at county levels. Agricultural dedications, which each county affords through one means or another, which is essentially a differential tax assessment. If you dedicate your land to agricultural use, you receive a lower property tax rate, and these classifications come into the consideration or the application process in many of those systems. In terms of the other category, there were some related to agricultural planning or tree farm planning or land transfers, economic priorities, or housing development, often at the county levels. Land use controls, and some of the sort of just general environmental reporting were some of the other places that these systems are currently applied. So we, after, well, I guess I was somewhat in the process of doing all of the background research and putting together a project website that laid out in far more detail and a lot more slides what I've attempted to summarize here about these systems, we then led a series of outreach events, 6 in total, I believe. And in these events, we shared the background information as best we understood it about these systems. Participants were directed to the project website where they could explore some maps and overlay to see how the classification systems may differ in different areas across the state. And we asked participants to share their perspectives about these systems, whether they were effective, whether they're ineffective, the positives and negatives. And we used a tool called Polis, which is an online platform that allows participants to, in their own words, share their perspective, and then pass judgment upon the words that their peers have shared by saying, I agree, I disagree, or I don't know what that means, I'm going to skip it. In total, we had about 115 people voted through this system, casting over 6,500 votes on different perspectives that were shared. Of about 170 different statements were submitted, and each person voted on about 50 of them. And the average submittal was that people put in about 3 comments each. Right, so it was a pretty robust outreach in terms of compiling information about how these systems are used, where they are found to be useful, where they're found to be lacking. And some of the sort of high level takes would be that there was interest by participants in updating current classification systems, a perspective that the Land Study Bureau system was outdated, and that we should be considering a wide variety of factors into soil classification systems and agricultural land use regulation, including potentially things such as water infrastructure, climate change, traditional knowledge. But a key piece that came through was a desire to protect prime agricultural lands, and that updates to these systems need to be made, because while each of these systems has been around for decades, the updates are often, well, haven't been happening, and weren't necessarily designed to happen either. So this is what we learned about how these current systems work and are being applied here, but we also wanted to look in other jurisdictions. And so we did some what was termed as best practice research, really hoping to identify effective approaches applying land evaluation in the regulation of agricultural parcels, of agricultural regions. So this proceeded with a little bit of a desk research. We made a long list, those places in yellow and listed at the bottom, of some possible areas. Really, what this really drove home is that the land capability classification system that I mentioned earlier, that the USDA NRCS produces, is applied in many states in lieu of something like the LSB here. After an initial review of these this long list, and with some feedback from the OPSD and our steering committee, we decided to hone in on 3 jurisdictions: California, Maryland, and New York. Some of the reasons that those were picked, among others, California, of course, has is essentially the size of a country in its complexity and regulatory structure. So they had multiple programs that we could look into. And of particular interest was that one of the efforts had integrated an almost a model that was readily updated every time soil data from the USDA was updated. And so that digital update mechanism was of particular interest. In Maryland, and one of the perspectives that have been shared in part from the steering committee, was that we wanted to have landscapes that were similar, agricultural settings that were similar. So Maryland's former plantation landscape with a similar distribution in terms of number and size of farms is part of what the interest there. And then in New York, there had been, while a long history of a lot of economic focused classification systems, they have been pushing forward with trying to explore how soil health and carbon assessments can be integrated into regulatory structures for agricultural land management. So as a takeaway, we saw, as I mentioned, in California, the use of a digital model to enable regularly updating the system as soon as new soils data becomes available was a particularly important takeaway. Another approach there that I'll touch on a little bit later was that they had stacked these classification systems upon one another. And so there might be a base system that's focused, say, on the inherent physical soil characteristics, but instead of having a single system that is applied to every regulatory approach that involves agricultural land, they then built tailored systems. So you might have a particular model that is focused on energy development in agricultural lands, for example, that it has different parameters than the base system that helps you understand the inherent physical soil quality. And we found that to be an important piece because here, as noted earlier, right, the LSB system is currently applied in many different jurisdictions and for a lot of different reasons. And a key takeaway would be that if that not over applying, or what could maybe even frame it as misapplying, something that is focused on physical soil characteristics for other regulatory purposes was an important piece that we took away from there. In Maryland, we saw how efforts similar to our legacy land program here, the Maryland Land Protection Program had integrated a couple of different classification systems, both in the preliminary application for agricultural land preservation by a county or by a landowner, and then in the review process that happens. Currently, our legacy lands efforts do not integrate any of these, any classification system into their agricultural considerations. In New York, we saw the value of partnering with the university, in their case with Cornell, which has been developing economic models for agricultural land evaluation since the 50s and continues to do so. And through partnership and support of the USDA, had actually been operating and updating an agricultural assessment system. I believe it was every 5 years. And so that was at least had a schedule, had a defined partnership that was integrated into the regulatory structure. Obviously, many other findings. I won't get into all of them here, but many of these will essentially be in our final report. So this was that's the bevy of background research. From there, we moved into the development of recommendations, really seeking to provide kind of actionable guidance that enhances the role of soil classification systems in agricultural land use regulation here. So really trying to have a distillation of all of the information that we'd pulled together, and really trying to see.
Mr. Avila, this is the chair. Let me just ask the commissioners if they have any questions on any of the information that's been presented so far. Okay, let's proceed. Thank you.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Okay. Can you, let me get my stuff up here. Can you explain to me, in your, I'm not sure what slide this was, assessing soil classification system. The last is cultural and indigenous considerations. Can you explain to me, what that means and
Sure. So there could have been traditional land use, for example. So agricultural lands of importance to the state of Hawaii, that effort specifically incorporated taro lands under other important agricultural lands in a way that LSB and LISA didn't have any mechanism of preferencing specific land uses that with cultural value or history. And this could otherwise maybe be the incorporation, say, of traditional ecological knowledge in one way or another into a classification system. This would be more in the consideration of, say, multifunctional system as opposed to just a focus on the physical soil characteristics.
And I noticed that most of them was, all the 4 systems was either moderate, one moderate, I guess, and all the rest were low. Is part of your recommendations would be included to increase that section of
for the cultural indigenous considerations in particular? Well, I think we're still very much in the process of developing what the final recommendations will be. I think modifying each of those individual systems to incorporate cultural knowledge would be rather onerous a task. But if seeking to, as I mentioned in terms of was it in California, I think it was, the stacking of different systems, our recommendations really are more focused on the what I kind of frame as the baseline system that focuses mostly on the physical soil characteristics and some of the economics of agriculture.
So from what I understand is the particular system that you are studying has these certain drawbacks, but that doesn't mean the land or things like what the Land Use Commission does and determine important agricultural lands, other statutes or regulations may fill in where they're
I think other statutes or regulations or other classification systems even. And so I would say our recommendations, and I touch on it in a couple of slides ahead. You know, we produced a volume of arguably too many recommendations across a lot of different issue areas, and in keeping more with the scope of this effort, have been directed to focus more just on the soil physical characteristics and a classification system that kind of solely focuses on those.
And the reason why I brought this up is that under our analysis that the Land Use Commission is required to take is the Kapa'akai analysis, which is essentially identifying cultural practices and under our constitution. And I was just wondering if that should be incorporated in some of the systems that we use to determine the importance of those agricultural lands.
I'll say from an individual perspective, I think that there is an opportunity to have multi-criteria, multiple in a classification system, and that there would be significant utility, particularly for the type of regulatory structures that LUC and some of the other bodies pursue. That being said, the recommendations that we're focused on for this effort, while we have some of those multifunctional pieces will end up in the final report, the key body of recommendations that we're being directed to focus on are more so emphasizing the physical soil characteristics and what might be viewed as the inherent sort of agricultural value, more from an agricultural planning lens as opposed to a broader land use lens.
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Let's proceed with the regular presentation.
So in developing these recommendations, really seeking to determine, what system or systems are going to be effective for use, so provide some options in terms of whether we're revising, replacing, to incorporate the feedback that we'd heard and to identify some of the requirements that may be associated with some of the recommendations made. Namely, are there some, a rough sense of whether it's a high likelihood of actually moving forward or not, what some of the regulatory changes might be. So we took all of that preliminary research, the stakeholder outreach, those best practices, and produced an initial list of about 40 recommendations, which is not well suited to outreach or understanding even. And from that, in further discussion with OPSD and with the steering committee's review, we're directed really to focus most on the soil what we are terming here as sort of the soil capability system, which again, I'm returning to the sort of the refrain of physical soil characteristics. And this makes sense in part because, as I mentioned earlier about stacking these systems upon one another, that would be the base upon which other classification systems are built, right? And so while we have recommendations that get towards multifunctional land suitability that considers maybe cultural value or climate change, those are to some degree built off of a strong base system that in this instance we're terming as soil capability. And so all of those other recommendations, and again, because we did outreach that was broad, we had energy developers, farmers, regulators, and got perspectives from across the state and across a diversity of perspectives that led to a diversity of recommendations. But again, we're kind of focusing here and moving forward on this kind of baseline soil capability system.
So, Mr. Haviland, before you leave that slide, can you go back to that slide? Can you provide a general definition of what you mean by those 5 categories, each of them?
Sure. So the general framework set of recommendations, and again, this was somewhat of an internal shorthand with the initial list of about 40 recommendations that we'd submitted to OPSD and the steering committee for review. So the general framework got into, let's see, some of them were even about perspectives, right? This could have been adopting a demand-driven land evaluation system, or the co-development of classifications and regulations simultaneously, and so sort of foundational aspects of land evaluation and regulation. The soil capability recommendations really more focused on developing or refining a comprehensive capability classification system that is accurate, adaptable, and reflective of current and historical land use. The multifunctional suitability was starting to then bring in some of these broader considerations that had come up through our outreach, whether this may have been soil health, crop suitability under climate change, public values, cultural value, etc., where we're starting to have a much more complex, manifold parameters that could be considered. The smart solar were really drawing from what we'd seen in a lot of the best practice research, as well as some of the targeted efforts on smart solar siting that the American Farmland Trust has done. And these were really focused on the intersection of agriculture and renewable energy development. The ancillary recommendations were more kind of, we could say, second or third order possibilities, things that could be done, nice to haves, but that weren't necessarily as critical. This could have been more about creating new programs or partnerships, or different tax assessments or agricultural conservation, land conservation programs.
So thank you for that. Let me throw you a curveball if I can for a minute, just to help
Please.
me get the thinking here. But what I haven't heard is what part of agricultural land might be most suitable for housing or urban development, which is a high priority in this state. So if I wanted to look at agricultural land that was unsuitable for agriculture or minor, so having a real challenge, kind of the opposite of important for agriculture, and that might be more suitable for urban development. Is this study taking that possibility in account in any way?
I would say if seeking to determine that from the study as it's been approached, you would look at sort of the negative space. I don't think identifying poor quality lands for housing development has come up anywhere along the way.
It hasn't, your statement is it wasn't considered in the scope of the study.
It was not.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
Not that I can recall. Are protected. Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe to clarify what I meant by the sort of the negative space, right, is that in defining which areas we wanted to defining quality across the state from a soil physical characteristic perspective, and conceivably defining multifunctional value through later systems that could be developed in the areas that are then found to have lower multifunctional value or lower land quality, you could conceivably then make some determinations around where you might want to develop. As to Katya's point, the Land Study Bureau's system is currently applied for a variety of regulatory purposes, with lower rated lands being those that have the largest variety of uses. So while housing development of lower quality agricultural land wasn't an emphasis of this, it conceivably could be determined. And from editorialize, I would say I think if that were a desired knowledge piece to make decisions based off of, from looking at best practices in other jurisdictions, having a specific assessment or a specific system that is focused on the parameters for housing development would be better than the over application of, say, a baseline soil capability system to then say, well, this is poor for, you know, based off, if it may not be ideal for one type of agricultural use, but it could still be useful for others, and that having a more targeted classification system for that housing development and agricultural lands is something that I saw done in other jurisdictions, not necessarily for housing, but for other types of agricultural land use. I think I got that out clearly enough. So with this initial set of recommendations, the language in here is still under development, right? So we had that list of 40. We've now kind of rejiggered what how they fit together, and are in the process, you know, beginning our outreach with this sort of draft list, explicitly with the intent of honing and paring the language down and getting the conceptual clarity, as well as getting feedback on whether this makes sense, whether it feels like it could be applied, which of these may want to be applied, and to some degree hoping to tease out a little bit further as well what the kind of what the relationship is between these different recommendations. Some of them need to come first. Some of them could come later. And while I did at some point produce a very confusing bowl of spaghetti relating all of these 40 recommendations to one another, we have yet to do so for these because we wanted to get some more feedback before we're going to do so. But to kick us off, updating the existing soil classification system. Really wanted to see the outdated systems in our regulations get updated, right? So are there places where ALISH is being applied or where LSB is being applied that could benefit from using newer analyses to really enhance the effectiveness and the relevance, right? So making sure that that the right system is being applied for the right regulatory purpose. And really that would be replacing outdated classification systems. Second recommendation being to make that baseline system statewide. Currently, the Land Study Bureau spatial layer provided by the Office of Planning is, well, I think I say was revised maybe 10 years ago or so, based off of land use district boundaries. Right, so this was a statewide data set when it was produced in the 50s, or rather 60s and early 70s. However, the digitization of that data has never been fully completed. So there's actually volumes of information held within the Land Study Bureau analysis that remain to some degree inaccessible. But the current mapping that's available only covers the agricultural district. And so if you're seeking to use this baseline, this tool to understand agricultural land quality, it is limited in its application. What we saw in many other states, unfortunately, the SERGO database that the NRCS produces has statewide coverage here. Not every state is so lucky. So we recommend that the system that is developed have statewide coverage and use, again, this most recent data. That being the data coming from the NRCS. Third, in terms of the updating, is to ensure that historical and current land use are factors in this baseline soil capability system. This is important for a couple of reasons. One, some recent analysis of agricultural land quality and soil quality here in the islands has demonstrated significant differences for parcels that have intensive plantation land use histories. Currently, we are regulating our agricultural land use based off of, as I said earlier, data largely coming from the LSB, data collected in the 1930s, in some cases, not even from soil sampling, but just from asking producers or ranchers or land managers their perspective about soil quality. So the notion that land manager had in 1930 about a given parcel or area is dictating whether or not you can build a solar farm on agricultural land in 2030. However, this system is not has not afforded for the intervening, at a minimum, say half century of intensive agricultural land use, and the most recent large update to the soil survey geographic database for the islands was done in the 1970s. And so we know that some of our soils data, our best soils data, is still out of date. And so a way to address that lag or the lack of having an entire statewide update is to ensure that we incorporate into the classification the history of intensive agricultural use and recent agricultural land use, because they have significant effects on soil quality. All right. Again, and these do sort of bleed into one another. It sort of becomes a little difficult to explain one without accidentally stumbling my way into another. But we really want to base the system on the latest available data. And again, this would be coming from the NRCS's Soil Survey Geographic Database, or SURGO. NRCS does do an annual soils refresh that does usually kind of targeted geographic updates to their soil database. So for example, if there's a lava flow, they will then go and update to change that soil type. And there can be other sort of targeted updates that happen. Making sure that that data gets factored in to a baseline system is important. And ideally at some point, and this was another sort of one of those down the line recommendations that is not part of this presentation, but will hopefully be somewhere in our final report, could be the pursuit of actually updating the entire SURGO database for the islands. Number 5 is noting that we need to strategically select the crops that we incorporate into the productivity or economic analysis that's part of this baseline system. So the Land Study Bureau, one of the things that came up often in our outreach was that there was a perspective that the LSB system was tailored and sort of preferenced plantation agriculture. And the economic part of the reason that agricultural planners that have been part of this process really like the Land Study Bureau analysis is that it is robust. It considers soil characteristics, but it also considers economic and some productivity factors, which many were concerned that they only really considered plantation agriculture, namely sugar and pine. While the system that was developed for LSB did actually have diversified agricultural output as a economic consideration, so they didn't just look at sugar and pine, they looked at a variety of other crops. We want to make sure that the system that's developed for today carefully selects the crops, because you're essentially embedding through the economic analysis, you're embedding into the classification system a particular type of agricultural activity. And this is conceivably an opportunity where important cultural crops could come in, or where maybe import replacement crops or other economic diversification for agriculture. That's where we can embed this. In other states, what I saw, I believe it was in New York, their entire economic classification system is based off of the productivity of the land for corn and hay, and that's it. So if you're a diversified agricultural operator, not producing silage or grains, your productivity is maybe totally skewed, but this system and the system that they're evaluating you against, and to some degree tethering your tax assessment to, maybe not in alignment. So we need to be very strategic when we're selecting the crops for an economic analysis. Finally, for this slide, and this is sort of the real politic of it, is that we should be retaining the Land Study Bureau title. It is unlikely, in my appraisal, that all of the regulations embedded in state and county get revised should we develop a new classification system. And so retaining the Land Study Bureau title while overhauling the model. And this is where there's sort of a bit of a legacy from the previous drafting. It's not necessarily overhauling the model for multifunctional use. It could be just overhauling the model for soil capability system, that new baseline system. But we recommend retaining the name while changing the inner parts. That way, the new model is immediately being applied in the existing regulatory structures, as opposed to creating a new model and then having to fight tooth and nail at every department to modify the regulations. Excuse me. As a sort of a broader consideration, we then recommend establishing this soil capability system as a baseline for agricultural governance, right? So, and again, part of that previous recommendation gets towards that. But instead of having a piecemeal of ALISH is used in this consideration, and LSB is used here, and LISA's, maybe embedded in some administrative rules, really trying to pursue having a system that can be used as a baseline for both counties and at the state level. All right, finally, we've got some kind of what are maybe secondary recommendations, and this would be really trying to clarify, as I mentioned earlier, that unspecified mention in our regulatory system. So clarifying, what do we mean when we say, soil classification in the variety of recommendations that are in specific. And this one is, I think it'd be possibly a fair bit trickier, but identifying a mechanism to address classification disparities at the parcel level. One of the things that came up in particular from energy developers that were part of our outreach was that the classification system seemed to be almost arbitrary, right? So they're working on a single parcel. This portion of it is, grade E, and right next to it was grade A, and maybe there was a fence there in a different land use a century, the better part of a century ago, but that disparity there was no mechanism to actually address concerns. And a few other jurisdictions do have means by which whether it was for a dedication process or sort of a zoning overlay, there were mechanisms by which individual parcel owners or counties could pursue a sort of a reclassification or to address some of the disparities that they saw. That's the initial list that we're chewing through. From some of the next steps from here, we'll be continuing to hone, taking your feedback, and I think really over the course of the rest of our outreach, mostly over the course of the summer, we'll be really trying to get this down into a cohesive package that hopefully can be conveyed in smaller words and in a bit shorter time. But we'll take all that follow-up outreach, produce a final set of recommendations. All of that information, along with the sort of other set of ideas, will be then included in a final report that goes to the legislature in preparation for the 2025 session. And with that, thank you for your time, and really happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Let me take a quick check of the clock. I think I'd like to take a 5-minute break here. It's 10:58, so let's come back get everybody an opportunity to catch their breath, and we'll come back at 11:05. Thank you.
All right, everyone's back.
Okay, thank you. We'll resume. Commissioners, do you have any questions or comments on the presentation? Commissioner Lee?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just want to kind of comment and see if maybe Mr. Hevelin had any remarks on this, but was it kind of intentional that this study seems like it's very isolated in purpose? Which I mean that, you said that this didn't consider what lands would be better for building because they're unsuitable for other things. But was that intentional that this was, this study was done or planning to be done in isolation?
I don't believe it was intended to be done in isolation. I would say that the scope of uses that were considered were agricultural uses, not for housing development, right? So we intentionally had done outreach with regulators, with energy developers that, you know, it doesn't require a zoning change, for example, or a district change. And so that loss of agricultural land use wasn't within the scope.
Okay, because while I didn't memorize the OPSD study, I did review it, and doesn't seem like there's a lot of research into how much land do we even need in Hawaii for agriculture? How many people even want to do agriculture? You know, the demand, the need, you know, that type of analysis. Is that correct?
That was not the scope. You are correct. However, I would say and as a kind of agriculture and food system focused planner, I think there have been studies that seek to, well, I've done studies that try and seek to understand, you know, what the population, the sort of the carrying capacity, if you will, type analysis. They aren't often the most robust and have a set of parameters built into those models that are rarely reflective and almost never reflexive to sort of the real world in my mind. And so I think from a regulatory standpoint, what we do see is there's a loss of agriculture. Well, there has been a shrinking agricultural footprint and a change in the type of use of agriculture, of currently districted and zoned agricultural lands, namely in the form of energy, of renewable energy development. And so those became the focus, or at least were part of the outreach that was written in, I believe, into the bill.
Okay, and finally, just one last question, Mr. Evelyn. What do you see the legislature doing with this study next, beginning of next session?
Oh my, what do I see them doing with it? I think depending on the structure of the recommendations, if I recall correctly, there had been maybe a previous effort some years prior that had aimed to update one of the systems. I think it was LSB, or that was kind of directed at that. I can't recall if it made it to a bill or if it was just sort of notional or just sort of in the ether in the legislature. My perspective coming into this project, and it's been an interesting thing to try and navigate because I do modeling work, is that we were not tasked to come up with what that model, the details of what a better model is, but to make recommendations sort of not just notionally, but with some degree of detail about what that model should address. And so my perspective, hopefully, is that we come out of this with a better sense of what could be written in to, say, upcoming legislation that would then develop that model, develop what in the parlance for this meeting has sort of been this baseline soil classification system.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Evelyn. Thank you, Chair.
Commissioner Lee, if I might just add a little bit more information. This is Katia Balasiano from OPSD. I think that Hunter summarized it correctly. There are many different ways to understand land and how to best use land. And the scope that the legislature gave us was fairly narrow to look really just at how soils are captured in our regulatory system, and not all of the different ways to analyze a parcel of land and come to a conclusion as to how it would best be used. If Supersistence, Hunter and his team came to the conclusion that, you know, the current LSB system and how it's woven into our regulations is good and fine and current, and there's no issue, well, that's the report that we would provide to the legislature. And then the effort stops there. But if the recommendation is LSB no longer serves us and it needs to be revised, then that recommendation would be followed with, and here's what we would need to do in order to change our regulatory system to better reflect the recommendations that came out of the study. We did not want to presume that LSB is faulty or is no longer relevant. We needed to do the study first before we could recommend to the legislature what action should be taken.
Okay, so Ms. Palaciano, so if I'm not completely confused and off base here, this is a study or a review of the framework or methodology of studying soils, and you're not imparting any value judgments on the land or use itself. Is that fair?
Well, the system that we currently use helps us understand agricultural lands in particular. So that is the, let's say, bias that the LSB system brings to the regulatory framework. So we're trying to understand that existing system and the degree to which, if any, it can be improved.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was getting at, because there is going to be some value as part of your methodology. So I don't know how you can avoid that, and not including housing as part of it might be part of that bias. But thank you.
Pardon me, Commissioner Carr Smith.
Thanks, Dan. Thought that's what you said. Thank you. I was wondering to what extent the study considered the fact that each of the 4 counties are so different geographically, geologically, in terms of the soil, and you mentioned identifying crops that were appropriate. I mean, how do you do that from island to island and be accurate?
So we did, I think, less from a geographic difference, but we did end up, for our initial outreach, aiming to have county-focused discussions, so that we could better understand, I think, a little bit more from the regulatory side. Obviously, there is a large diversity both in soil type and agricultural activity within islands and between islands. However, I think as the thrust of this was to have really be focused on the nexus of classification and regulation, the approaches didn't seem to differ all that much. I mean, and a primary, everybody's using zoning as a tool to govern land use, and everybody's got a differential tax assessment for agricultural dedications, and the details in there are tailored at the county level, but from a assessment of really, this is not trying to be prescriptive in any way of the type of, say, crops that people should grow, and so we weren't necessarily needing to wade into that. as an issue.
Okay, you had mentioned it in your presentation, so that's why I asked about the crops. And
Yeah, I think, I mean, I've done modeling work for assessing crop suitability, and one of the pieces that was in about, or that came up in some of our outreach, and part of my interest in this effort overall was thinking about what are the parcels that could grow the largest diversity of crops under the broadest climate regimes, and so that we could then seek to try and understand which areas are going to be useful for the largest amount of producers over the longest period of time. But that's the kind of assessments that I think could come subsequent to updating this baseline kind of soil capability focused system. And fortunately, we didn't have to delineate all of that in terms of like the model details as part of this scope. But it is, to Commissioner Lee's comment earlier, I think a direction that could come subsequently through, once a baseline system is revised, that's the type of kind of add-on or additional analysis that could be done.
thank you. I'm good.
Commissioners, anybody else? Commissioner Ohigashi.
Yeah, under the current LSB, you have ABC land classifications.
Speak closer to the microphone.
You're not my boss. No, under the existing LSB, there's different classifications, the A, B, C, D. I don't know, it goes on to F, I think. System, F. And you stated that most these classifications development occurred in the 50s, and they were direct or was based upon the agricultural use predominant at that time. I'm guessing sugarcane and pineapple at that time. Would that be, in other words, the good sugarcane land and the good pineapple land were under ABC, AB, lands?
I would say that system was developed in part to ensure that those quality plantation lands were protected. However, in the economic portion of the LSB's weighting system, they did consider crops, what we would call diversified crops, beyond just sugar and pineapple.
And if we modify the definitions contained in the economic portions, if we would, like, lower lands be able to be classified as A and B lands, or would A and B lands drop down to C lands? Is there a possibility of that happening?
I think that is a possibility, in both directions, right?
And in your studies, do you see any type of different weights that you want to put on that particular definitions in order so that the classifications remain the same? The definitions in the rules and regulations and statutes remain the same, but what constitutes an A property? What constitutes a B property? What constitutes a C property, D property? All may be modified so that a more accurate actual use of that property, or potential use of that property, or classification of that property can be gained.
I think that as an approach towards one of the recommendations of essentially keeping LSB as the title, that type of approach could be valuable by modifying those internal algorithm, if you will. Mm-hmm. However, for the scope of this effort, and I say this as a modeler who wants to ferret out all those details, we did not get to here's what those weightings should be. Here's what that new algorithm and new weighting system should entail.
And how would we go about, or the state go about, redefining, or what kind of system or what kind of process should we use to try and determine that?
So, and to the earlier question, I think that's something that the legislature would ideally be supporting and pushing forward. In the previous effort with the Land Study Bureau itself, created by the legislature for this particular effort, in part coming around with the development of our land use districts. And so having a body or a contract or a partnership with a university to figure out those details, I think.
Would part
be a
of
way
your recommendations be to look at doing such a process or beginning such a process? Is that going to be part of your recommendations here?
Yes, I don't know that we had anything that explicitly said the legislature should do this, but I think in the sort of in the between the lines of all these different things that need to change is, well, somebody's gonna have to initiate that, but I don't think we had one that was as explicit.
Would it be helpful if you had a specific recommendation? The legislature should consider a process to analyze and redefine the existing LSB rating system so that we can get a proper classifications of all agricultural lands.
Yeah, I think the way that at least some of the existing recommendations work to get towards that, and again, this was things that did not end up in this presented list, was to partner with the university, right? So essentially having a state entity, a state, county, et cetera, partner with a university or similar institution, I think was the language that we came to.
I'll give that suggestion.
Originally it said partner with UH.
I'll give you that suggestion for free.
But thank you.
The last question, is more of a comment. And the reason why I asked all those questions was the practical effect on the Land Use Commission is that we do independent or not important agricultural land designations.
Mm-hmm.
And it would seem to me that what we have been doing is utilizing a rating system that was developed to protect the plantation, rather than a rating system that may accurately reflect if these agricultural lands are truly A and B. You know, A and B shouldn't. It's funny that those A and B lands, because important agricultural lands are limited to A and B lands.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I asked, can a C land eventually be reduced? So I think that it's important in this regard that important agricultural lands designations be utilize the most recent classifications or the most up-to-date classifications possible. That's all. That's a comment.
I agree. And to your comment, I mean, about whether these systems would change, a key weighting factor in these was the extent of irrigation or rainfall, should irrigation not have been provided. And the infrastructure for irrigation has shifted drastically since these were produced. And so if we didn't change the model and just updated it or just renewed it with the current data, I think we would see a significant loss in agricultural land quality or agricultural land ratings that ideally I think further reinforces the need to change the model itself, because we don't want to just get rid of all of our agricultural lands because the rating changes, right? Another piece that was in the sort of longer list of recommendations are that there's currently no mechanism that I've come across at the state that actually tracks agricultural land loss. The American Farm Land does a national study. Hawaii is regularly not a participant of the loss of agricultural land. And so through zoning modifications or district boundary modifications, there is no compendium to understand where our agricultural lands what lands are no longer agricultural. And I think in looking at other jurisdictions, what had been identified was the opportunity to have incentives or tax structures or sticks and carrots to ensure that if you're losing agricultural land, say to energy development, that there are different exactions that can be put upon, or that the bar changes as more land is lost. And at current, we do not have any mechanisms that track that.
Just one last comment. It's really important because I'm going to give you an example. We're going to hear next 2 weeks status report about the landfill on Maui. And what happened in that landfill was that in order to increase the size of the landfill, they went into important agricultural lands that were designated by this land use commission. And if you think about it, in that area, because I'm familiar with that area, perhaps in the past it may be an A and B land, but certainly it probably doesn't qualify for one now. So the impact of proper classification is real upon these things. The other thing is, by the way, is important agricultural land. If a developer, like or large owner of property does it, they can, so long as they designate 51% of their property, or 50 plus whatever acres, the remaining acres can be cannot be designated anymore. In other words, the remaining acres can be more easily developed. So the question is, what are they putting into the important agricultural land designations? Are they truly the A and B lands or the A and B lands of 1950s? So those are practical, important types of applications that your classification study will have. Thank you.
Commissioners, anything further? Who's Commissioner Kahele?
Yes, Chair. I have one question. Is the Department of Agriculture, all in support of your recommendations? I mean, I don't see anybody here from Department of Ag.
We have not asked them that specifically at this point in time. They have seen the draft recommendations. They're a member of the steering committee, and they have provided some comments and have been providing comments on a variety of the deliverables associated with this project. But we're still in the place of collecting information. We're doing the necessary outreach that we had intended to. So we've not provided them with I mean, there is no final report yet that we're asking them to review. Additionally, I'd say that the members of the steering committee are not approving or opposing the report that's being prepared. They are providing guidance. They are, reviewing the materials, but we're not asking them for their approval or not. That's not the way the legislature set up the study.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Kahele. Anybody else?
I would just add that our steering committee member from the Department of Agriculture has been consistent in the perspective that the system should be based in the physical soil characteristics, and these recommendations and the honing to focus on that is reflective of that perspective.
Commissioner Otto has a question.
Who's that?
Yeah, this is similar to infrastructure, but the water irrigation that the plantation people left, and then so some of it continue to maintain, others have gone, and that affects the land use classification, right? And so and then the most in Lahaina, with there's been a lot of comment that tourism has taken over the land. You know, what used to be owned by the plantation, now it's going to tourism, and tourism is, you know, and that's a question, but that affects the soil classification. So I mean, how is that being handled actually?
Well, I could say at least in terms of your comment about irrigation. So again, we have not delineated the details of what the internal model algorithm, if you will, would entail. The LSB effort had a different weighting if the land had irrigation versus if it was just reliant upon rainfall. And the later system, the land capability classification system that the NRCS has produced that many other states utilize, also has a rating that's if irrigated and a rating if not. And so that's one sort of possibility to consider. Because I think if we were to solely focus on whether the land has irrigation currently, and that was the only measure in our weighting system, as I mentioned earlier, I think we would have a significant decline in how we view the quality of our agricultural lands. But the potential, if irrigated, is an important consideration as well, especially with the recent investments and can hopefully continued future of state acquisition of what have long been private and now senescing irrigation infrastructure.
Okay. Commissioner Atta, is that good? I assume so. So I have a couple of questions, Mr. Haviland, in no particular order. But one of the terms that you used that I didn't understand, I wonder if you could give us a definition, was prime agricultural land. What do you mean by prime agricultural land?
So prime agricultural land is defined in the agricultural lands of importance to the state of Hawaii. There was a set of parameters in part informed by the national effort that were then tailored by the local partners, UH, and I'm not recalling exactly who all else, that set a definition for prime. And so it varies by state, but Hawaii has a particular class. I apologize, I have not committed it to memory.
So you don't know what the definition of prime agricultural land is in the Hawaiian context?
I am confident it's in our report, and I'm confident I have not committed all of that report to memory.
Would it be your
but it's on the project website as well. I apologize, I don't have the internet access in here, but
would it be
or actually, I probably have it in my notes. I can give me 1 sec.
take a minute.
So prime agricultural land met the following, thank you. Soils that have a dependable, and this is page 12 of our interim report. So prime agricultural land in the ALISH classification. Let's see. Prime land had dependable and adequate moisture supply and good water storage capacity, mean annual temperature and growing season suitable for prevailing crops. A list of 10 different facets there. Water table either lacking or so deep it doesn't negatively affect plant growth. Soils are neither too acid nor too alkaline, not flooding. And I would say of maybe particular intrigue is that the soils are not so stony in the surface layer as to cause difficulty in cultivating with large equipment. Right, and so these are the types of kind of details, as I mentioned prior, about the crop selection, that this is, preferencing a certain type of agricultural production in its consideration.
So that's where I wanted to go next. So would prime agricultural land, as you review it in this context of this study, be land that's best suited for plantation farming or for current day type of agricultural activities?
Well, it doesn't define what large equipment is. And so the prime, large, I think land that is good for, flat and arable and has good surface texture which may make it suitable for what could be viewed as a more industrial agriculture, would probably also work quite well for diversified or smaller agricultural operations.
Fair enough. I want to shift to your forthcoming outreach. So first of all, I'm pleased to learn that you did some outreach already with energy developers, because as you probably know, energy developers do come before this commission seeking exemptions to the use of agricultural land for energy purposes. However, my specific question is, in your forthcoming outreach, is it possible for you to include outreach to housing developers?
I think it's distinctly possible. I mean, these are relatively open invites. We did targeted outreach based off of the populations that were identified in the act from the legislature. That being said, with the focus of this largely now coming to zero in on physical soil characteristics and their soil capability system, I do wonder how many housing developers would be particularly interested in that discussion, but I'll defer to Katya on.
I also wanted to just indicate that we have been communicating with the Land Use Research Foundation and had invited them. They participated, the director of the foundation, and all of the major large landowners had been invited to the previous round of outreach. And I believe we did have a number of folks who represent and build housing participate in that outreach. So they did actually participate previously. And I think going forward, we do want, the diversity of input. But what we then, of course, found through the outreach that we conducted previously is that there are so many diverse interests that it took us in so many different directions that had more to do with how should land be used in Hawaii, when in fact the focus of this study has much more to do with the land classifications themselves. I'm sorry, the soil classifications themselves. So we wrestled with that diversity. The recommendations that Hunter presented today have everything to do with the soil classification system. However, in the final report, there will be all of the recommendations that have come from the outreach, which do speak, as Hunter suggested earlier, to smart solar, how taxes can encourage the protection of agriculture, how soil maps should be digitized for greater transparency. All of the recommendations that came out will be included in the final report. However, the emphasis of this next round of outreach is really just the soil classifications themselves. We're trying to dig more deeply into that which the legislature asked us to look into.
So I understand what you're saying and why you're saying it. But I think that in the same way that you did outreach to energy developers, you're missing the boat by not talking to housing developers. And I'm not talking about landowners. I'm talking about entities that are looking for places to build housing in Hawaii. And it's kind of the opposite end of the spectrum from the top classification of soils. And I want to build on what Commissioner Ohigashi said in terms of the subclassifications, because I do support your primary conclusion to stay with LSB. I think that's correct. It would be too much turmoil to upset that apple cart. But there's some real opportunity when you get into a redefinition of permissible uses for the different subclassifications. And that's what's really warranted at this time in place in Hawaii. We don't have plantation farming anymore, and most of that was directed in the original writing of these subclassifications is outdated. So it's an opportunity to update that. Much of what this Land Use Commission deals with are exemptions to permissible uses as defined by an antiquated system. So even the energy developers that come before us, they want an exemption, or they want a reclassification, or they want a special use permit for what is now an unpermissible use on a subclassification of the land based on the soils. So I think that you have a real opportunity to suggest in your recommendations to the legislature of how to update these subclassifications. I think that's where Commissioner Ohigashi was going, and I'm supporting that. Maybe Commissioner Ohigashi can confirm that's where he was going for me. But I think that's an opportunity. Otherwise, this Land Use Commission and counties are always dealing with, how can we deal with an exemption or a special use permit? Why can't we get proactively and look at these soil classifications and subclassifications to be more tailored to where we're going in the current century and the current needs of our uses? We don't need plantation farming now. It's not going to happen. That's my view. I know it's a comment more than a question, but that's where I'm coming from.
Chair Giovanni, my name is Barbara Natal with G70, and we were a part of the project where we did the outreach to it. And I did want to note that we did reach out to groups such as Castle and Cook, Hawaii, Alexander and Baldwin, the Hawaii Association of Realtors. And I'm just wondering, are there any other developers or, yes, housing developers that you would recommend for us to reach out to?
I'm not gonna, I would encourage you to research that. I'm not in a position to name specific companies, from where I sit on this commission. But I think in the same way that and I'm glad to hear that you did reach out and you are getting some feedback from them. But where I'm going ultimately is that if there are lands that are currently classified as agricultural, and they have either poor soil quality for modern day agriculture, or they don't have water availability, which is critical for successful agriculture, they become candidates for other uses, and those other permissible uses on that land that is currently agricultural and not recognized as a permissible use, it would save a lot of time and energy by the regulatory bodies at the county and state level to have to continually deal with exemptions or reclassifications.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Ohigashi, am I speaking to your interest here?
Sure. Even though I'm a short timer, so.
Okay.
I think the chairman is exactly on point, but I think that the Department of Agriculture, as well as Hawaiian Homelands Commission, would have probably input could be used in this case, especially with their big push to develop their lands. Okay.
And I have one final question. It's kind of an obtuse question, but how does the consideration for forestry, managed forestry, enter into this discussion of the use of agricultural land, or does it at all?
No, I don't think that we necessarily discussed that. A lot of it is under the conservation classification, and a lot of what we're looking at is primarily under the agricultural land classification. There is agroforestry, which is something that on agricultural lands would be affected by this classification system. But we didn't delve into specific types of crops.
Okay. Commissioners, last chance. Anything further? Okay, hearing none, we're going to proceed to a final round of public testimony if there is any there, one interested. Ms. Kwan, is there anybody, members of the public present that wish to testify at this time?
In the room, nobody wishes to present testimony at this time, but I just want to remind those on the Zoom, if anyone would like to give testimony, please use the Q&A feature now. I'll give you a minute. I don't think we have any on the Zoom, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. And let me, on behalf of the commission, let me extend our appreciation to OPSD and their consultants for this briefing. I think that you heard some feedback, and hopefully you can take that to heart, and you've got an opportunity to factor that into your final lap or two around the, before you bring this to closure. But I think it would be great, the more specific your recommendations on next steps could be to the legislature, the better, rather than just general recommendations. The more specific, the better. So I appreciate that. So thank you all. Okay, that
Thank
brings
you for allowing us to be here today.
Thank you, Katya. Our next meeting is June 19 and 20 in Maui at the University of Hawaii Maui College. The main cafeteria is expected to be closed at that time, and I'd like the commission intends to work through lunch. I would like to request that the staff arrange for lunch to be provided to the commissioners to facilitate that meeting. So Mr. Derrickson, will you please take note of that?
Yes, Chair, we will.
Okay, commissioners, any other business you'd like to, or comment you'd like to make today before I ask for a motion for adjournment? Seeing none, this motion is, this concludes our meeting, and I declare this meeting adjourned. So thank you very much, and we'll see you on, in Maui on June 19th. Thank you.